Before Uncle Martin charmed audiences with his retractable antennae, this beloved 1960s sitcom harbored dark secrets that would make even a Martian's antenna quiver. From a vicious chimp attack that required plastic surgery to a mysterious Italian special effects wizard who refused to reveal his antenna secrets, the production was plagued by bizarre incidents, career-destroying typecasting, and a theme song that accidentally launched one of the most famous Beach Boys hits in history. Fact 1. Chimp attack left Ray Walston needing plastic surgery. In September 1963, during the filming of what would become a lost episode of My Favorite Martian, Ray Walston experienced one of the most terrifying incidents in television production history when a trained chimpanzee named Jimmy launched a vicious and unprovoked attack that left the actor requiring extensive reconstructive surgery. The incident occurred while Walston and his co-star Bill Bixby were filming a scene inside a car on an extremely hot day at the studio. He and Bixby were seated in the front seats of the vehicle, while Jimmy the chimpanzee occupied the back seat for what should have been a routine filming sequence. The animal had been working in Hollywood productions and was considered trained and manageable by his handlers. However, something went terribly wrong when the chimpanzee apparently reacted to the scorching hot upholstery of the car. Whether it was the extreme heat, stress from the filming environment, or some other unknown trigger, Jimmy suddenly became aggressive and launched himself at Walston with shocking violence. The attack was swift and brutal, with the animal biting Walston viciously around his left eye, behind both ears, along his jaw, and on both of his hands before handlers could intervene and pull the animal away from the terrified actor. The injuries were so severe that Walston required immediate medical attention and extensive plastic surgery to repair the damage to his face and neck. The attack was so traumatic that production on My Favorite Martian was completely shut down for 8 full weeks, while Walston recovered from both his physical injuries and the psychological trauma of the incident. The episode they were filming was never completed and became known as the lost episode of the series, with the footage presumably destroyed or lost forever. Fact 2. The theme song accidentally created good vibrations. The haunting, otherworldly sound that opened every episode of My Favorite Martian directly led to one of the most famous and recognizable songs in pop music history through a completely unexpected chain of events that connected a 1960s television show to the Beach Boys' masterpiece, Good Vibrations. The show's distinctive theme music was performed by Paul Tanner, a former trombonist who had played with the legendary Glenn Miller Orchestra from 1938 to 1942. Tanner had invented a unique electronic instrument in the late 1950s that he called the electro-theremin, which he built with the help of amateur inventor Bob Witzel. This custom-made device, which Tanner referred to simply as the box, produced sounds similar to a traditional theremin but was much easier to control and play accurately. When composer George Greeley was creating the music for My Favorite Martian, he hired Tanner to perform the eerie, sci-fi sounds on his mysterious instrument that would become the show's signature musical element. The electro-theremin created those distinctive rising and falling tones that accompanied Uncle Martin's antenna extending and his various Martian powers throughout the series. Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys was apparently watching the show and became fascinated by the unique sound of Tanner's instrument. When Wilson was working on what would become Good Vibrations in 1966, he specifically sought out Tanner and hired him to play his electro-theremin on the recording. The instrument created that famous high-pitched, ethereal sound that most people mistakenly think is a traditional theremin, but was actually Tanner's homemade invention that had been featured on My Favorite Martian for 3 years. Tanner later revealed that when Brian Wilson asked him for sheet music during the recording sessions, Wilson laughed and explained that he couldn't write music because everything existed only in his head, so Tanner had to improvise the now iconic sound based on Wilson's verbal directions. Fact 3. Secretive Italian effects master, guarded antenna secrets. One of the most mysterious aspects of My Favorite Martian's production involved an eccentric Italian special effects expert who was so secretive about his antenna mechanism that he refused to let anyone, including Ray Walston himself, see how the iconic retractable antennae actually worked during filming. The production team had brought this unnamed Italian specialist to Hollywood specifically to create and operate the mechanical system that would make Uncle Martin's signature antennae appear to extend from the back of his head. This was no simple task in the early 1960s, long before computer-generated effects existed, and the show needed a practical solution that would look convincing on camera week after week. According to Ray Walston's own recollections in later interviews, the Italian effects master was incredibly protective of his trade secrets and maintained an almost paranoid level of secrecy around his invention. During filming, the specialist would position himself directly behind Walston, working some kind of mechanism that would press against the actor's shoulder blades to operate the antenna effect. Meanwhile, two assistants would kneel in front of Walston, presumably to help conceal the front-facing components of whatever system was being used. What made this arrangement even more bizarre was that nobody else on the production was allowed to observe the Italian expert's work methods. Walston himself was strictly forbidden from turning around to see what was happening behind him, and even the show's directors and producers were kept at a distance during the antenna sequences. The specialist guarded his technique so jealously that he wouldn't even explain the basic principles of how his device functioned. After the antennae were extended using this mysterious process, the cameras would stop rolling, and the crew would place a small toupee with fake antennae on Walston's head for the remaining shots. This combination of practical effects and simple props created the illusion that fooled television audiences for 3 seasons, though the exact mechanics remained a closely guarded secret that the Italian expert took with him when production ended. Fact 4. CBS killed the show to avoid a child character. The abrupt cancellation of My Favorite Martian after 3 successful seasons wasn't due to poor ratings or creative exhaustion, but rather CBS's immediate panic reaction when they learned that the producers planned to add a child character as a regular cast member for the proposed 4th season. During the 3rd season, the show introduced Uncle Martin's young Martian nephew named Andromeda, who was played by child actor Wayne Stamm. This character appeared in only a single episode late in the season and was specifically designed to bring younger viewers to what network executives considered an aging show. Andromeda had just 1 antenna instead of Uncle Martin's 2, which was explained in the storyline as the result of his baby antennae falling out with only 1 adult antenna growing in so far. The character was originally conceived as a way to inject new energy into the series and appeal to families with children, following the common television practice of adding younger characters to established shows. The producers had developed plans to make Andromeda a regular character for the 4th season, believing that the dynamic between Uncle Martin and his inexperienced young nephew would create fresh comedy opportunities and help expand the show's audience. However, according to Ray Walston's later interviews, CBS executives had a completely different reaction to this casting decision. In a conversation with Starlog magazine years after the show ended, Walston revealed that once CBS heard about the plans to make Andromeda a regular character in the 4th season, the network immediately announced the series' cancellation without any further discussion or negotiation. The network apparently believed that adding a child character would fundamentally change the show's appeal and potentially alienate their existing adult audience. This decision was particularly surprising, given that My Favorite Martian was still performing reasonably well in the ratings and had maintained a loyal fan base throughout its 3-year run, making the cancellation seem premature and unnecessarily hasty to both cast members and fans. Fact 5. Bill Bixby fled a lion through studio rafters. During the filming of the 3rd season episode titled, "Stop the Presses, I Want to Get Off," Bill Bixby experienced what became known as the infamous lion incident, which resulted in one of the most dramatic and comedic behind-the-scenes moments in My Favorite Martian history. The scene originally called for Ray Walston to perform near a lion, but Walston, being extremely cautious about working with dangerous animals after his previous traumatic experience with the chimpanzee, refused to do the scene and insisted that the script be rewritten. Bill Bixby, who was apparently more confident around animals, volunteered to take Walston's place in the scene. and the writers quickly adjusted the script to accommodate this change. The production team assured everyone that the lion being used was old, supposedly toothless, and completely harmless. The animal was secured behind what everyone believed was a sturdy glass partition that would keep the actors safe, while still allowing the cameras to capture the dramatic interaction. According to the script, Bixby was simply supposed to see the lion and react with a bit of nervous shaking for comedic effect. However, as the cameras began rolling and Bixby performed his part, the supposedly docile lion suddenly let out a tremendous roar and leaped directly at the glass partition with such force that it completely shattered, sending glass flying in all directions throughout the soundstage. The lion, apparently as stunned by this turn of events as everyone else, simply stood there blinking in confusion while chaos erupted around the set. Bill Bixby's reaction was immediate and impressive in its speed. He shot up a nearby ladder leading to the studio rafters so quickly that he seemed to disappear from the set entirely. Ray Walston later told the story with great amusement, claiming that Bixby moved so fast that nobody could find him for 3 hours afterward. When Bixby finally told his version of events, he admitted that he had indeed climbed to the rafters, only to discover that Walston was already up there, having wisely positioned himself there from the beginning. Fact 6. Ray Walston's career was destroyed by Uncle Martin. Despite making Ray Walston a household name and earning him millions of fans, My Favorite Martian ultimately became what the actor considered the most devastating career decision of his life, virtually destroying his ability to find serious acting work for years after the show ended. Before landing the role of Uncle Martin, Walston had established himself as a respected Broadway performer and character actor, winning a Tony Award for his performance as the Devil in Damn Yankees, and appearing in major films like The Apartment and South Pacific. He was known in Hollywood as a versatile actor, capable of handling both comedy and drama with equal skill. However, the overwhelming success of My Favorite Martian created an inescapable typecasting problem that haunted Walston for decades. In a brutally honest 1986 interview with the news pilot of San Pedro, California, Walston expressed his deep regret about taking the role, stating, "I wish I'd never heard of Martians and spaceships. I hate that show. It nearly finished my career. If I'd known then what I know now, I wouldn't have been involved with that show for anything in the world." The financial impact was immediate and severe. Walston revealed that in the year immediately following the show's cancellation in 1966, a shocking drop for an actor who had been commanding significant salaries before Uncle Martin. He explained that casting directors and producers could no longer see him as anything other than the quirky Martian with antennae, making it nearly impossible to land serious, dramatic roles. The typecasting followed him everywhere, even during personal vacations. Walston complained about traveling to Madrid and having strangers yell, "Hey Martin!" while putting their fingers behind their heads to mimic antennae. He credited his survival in the entertainment industry solely to his solid acting foundation from his pre-Martian career, saying, "If I hadn't had such a solid background as an actor, I would have been done after that role." Fact 7. The spaceship was sold for peanuts at auction. One of television history's most iconic props met an unexpectedly humble fate. When Uncle Martin's distinctive flying saucer was sold at a car auction in 1985 for the shockingly low price of just $750. Despite being instantly recognizable to millions of viewers who had watched My Favorite Martian during its original run and countless reruns. The spaceship that appeared in nearly every episode of the series was actually constructed from wood and then painted silver to create the metallic appearance that audiences saw on screen. This simple but effective construction method was typical of television production in the 1960s, when budgets were modest and practical effects had to be created using basic materials and techniques rather than the sophisticated methods available today. Throughout the show's 3-season run, the spaceship served as both a central plot device and a recurring visual element that helped establish the science fiction premise of the series. Uncle Martin was constantly working on repairing his damaged spacecraft so he could return to Mars, and viewers regularly saw the prop in the garage where Tim and Martin lived, making it one of the most frequently featured objects in the entire series. After the show ended in 1966, the spaceship prop apparently passed through various hands over the following decades, eventually ending up at a car auction nearly 20 years later. The fact that such an iconic piece of television history was being sold alongside used automobiles rather than through a specialized entertainment memorabilia auction suggests that its significance may not have been fully recognized at the time. The $750 selling price seems particularly remarkable when compared to the values that television and movie props command today, where even minor items from popular shows can sell for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. The low price also indicates that the collectible television memorabilia market was far less developed in the 1980s than it would become in later decades, when nostalgia for classic shows created substantial demand for authentic props and costumes. Fact 8. A missing black-and-white episode was deliberately shelved. In one of the most unusual scheduling decisions in television history, CBS deliberately held back a completed black-and-white episode of My Favorite Martian for over a year, ultimately airing it as the series finale on May 8, 1966, because network executives wanted to introduce Uncle Martin's time machine storyline in full color instead. The episode in question, titled Time Out for Martian, was filmed during the second season when the show was still being produced in black and white at Desilu Studios. This episode featured the first appearance of Uncle Martin's time machine, a device that would become a central element in many third-season storylines and represented a significant expansion of the show's science fiction elements beyond Martin's basic powers of invisibility and levitation. When CBS renewed My Favorite Martian for a third season, they made the decision to film the new episodes in color at MGM Studios, reflecting the television industry's broader transition toward color broadcasting in the mid-1960s. The network apparently felt that the time machine storyline was too important and visually exciting to debut in black and white when they now had the capability to present it in full color. Rather than simply airing Time Out for Martian as originally planned, CBS made the unusual choice to shelve the completed episode and commission new color episodes that would introduce the time machine concept instead. The third season opened with a two-part color episode called Go West, Young Martian that featured the time machine prominently and established it as a recurring plot device for the remainder of the series. The shelved black and white episode remained in CBS's vault throughout the entire third season while newer episodes aired in its place. Only when the series was approaching its end did the network finally decide to air Time Out for Martian, making it the final first-run episode of My Favorite Martian, despite being filmed more than a year earlier. This created the unusual situation where the series finale was actually a black-and-white episode from the previous season. Fact 9. Production schedule was so brutal actors had no rehearsal. The production schedule for My Favorite Martian was so punishing and chaotic that Ray Walston and Bill Bixby were forced to work under conditions that would be considered completely unacceptable by today's television standards, with virtually no rehearsal time and an exhausting pace that left little room for proper preparation or creative development. Unlike most television shows of the era, which typically followed a standard schedule of 3 to 4 days of rehearsal followed by 1 or 2 days of actual filming, My Favorite Martian required filming on all 5 days of every work week due to the enormous amount of time consumed by the show's special effects sequences. The invisibility tricks, levitation gags, and antenna extensions that made Uncle Martin's powers believable on screen required multiple takes, precise timing, and complex camera work that ate up countless hours of production time. Ray Walston revealed in interviews that the crew sometimes completed as many as 75 different camera setups in a single day, an incredibly demanding pace that left the actors exhausted and struggling to maintain their performances. The situation became even more difficult because the scripts for upcoming episodes were often thrust into the actors' hands at the last possible moment, sometimes when filming on the previous episode had just wrapped at 2:30 in the afternoon. This meant that Walston and Bixby had to learn their lines, understand their characters' motivations, and deliver convincing performances with only a brief run-through for camera positioning before the actual filming began. Bill Bixby described the chaotic nature of this schedule in a 1965 interview with TV star Parade magazine, explaining that during one week when Walston was sick with the flu, the production team filmed Bixby's scenes for 5 different episodes while waiting for his co-star to recover, working with 3 different directors on completely unrelated scenes and storylines that somehow had to fit together coherently when the episodes finally aired. Fact 10. The show predicted VCRs 2 decades early. In a remarkably prescient moment that demonstrated the show's forward-thinking approach to technology, My Favorite Martian accurately predicted the home video recording revolution that wouldn't become mainstream until the 1980s, nearly 20 years before most American households had ever heard of a VCR. During one episode that aired in the mid-1960s, Uncle Martin casually demonstrated to Tim that he possessed the ability to watch a television show and then play it back again later, essentially showing off what amounted to a primitive form of television recording and playback technology. This scene played out in a completely matter-of-fact way, with Martin treating this capability as just another one of his many Martian abilities, rather than the revolutionary concept it would prove to be. What made this moment particularly prophetic was Tim's immediate reaction to discovering Martin's recording powers. Upon seeing that his Martian roommate could capture television programming for later viewing, Tim's first instinct was to grab the current issue of TV Guide and start flipping through it to identify which shows would be worth recording for future enjoyment. This behavior perfectly mirrored what millions of Americans would do 2 decades later when VCRs finally became affordable and widely available in homes across the country. The scene captured not just the basic concept of home recording, but also the practical human response to having such technology available. Tim's excitement about being able to preserve his favorite programs and his strategic approach to selecting what content to record demonstrated an understanding of how people would actually use recording technology once it became accessible. This prescient moment stands as one of the most accurate technological predictions ever made on a television comedy show, anticipating both the hardware capability and the behavioral patterns that would define the home video era that began in earnest during the late 1970s and exploded in popularity throughout the 1980s. Fact 11. Real NASA engineers demanded antenna secrets. In November 1965, Ray Walston received an invitation to visit NASA's Mission Control Center in Houston, Texas. But the encounter with America's top rocket scientists and space engineers took an unexpectedly comedic turn when the professionals became far more fascinated by Uncle Martin's television antennae than by discussing their groundbreaking work in actual space exploration. The visit occurred during the height of the space race, when NASA was actively working on the Apollo program that would eventually land humans on the moon just a few years later. Mission Control was the nerve center of America's most ambitious technological achievements, staffed by brilliant engineers and scientists who were pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and capability in ways that seemed almost as fantastical as anything depicted on My Favorite Martian. However, instead of wanting to discuss the real challenges of space travel, rocket propulsion, or the complexities of lunar mission planning, the NASA engineers immediately bombarded Walston with detailed technical questions about how the retractable antennae effect was achieved on the television show. These highly educated professionals, who spent their days solving incredibly complex problems related to sending humans safely into space and back, were genuinely curious about the mechanical engineering behind a simple television prop. The engineers peppered Walston with questions about the construction, operation, and reliability of the antenna mechanism, wanting to understand every detail of how the effect was created and maintained throughout the show's production. They were particularly interested in the technical specifications and engineering principles that made the antennae appear to extend and retract so convincingly on camera week after week. This situation created the amusing irony of America's leading space technology experts being more interested in learning about a fictional Martian's television prop than sharing their own remarkable achievements in actual space. exploration with the actor who portrayed television's most famous extraterrestrial visitor. Fact 12. A planned TV movie reunion was cancelled by tragedy. In 1992, nearly 3 decades after My Favorite Martian ended its original run, television fans came tantalizingly close to seeing Ray Walston and Bill Bixby reunite in a made-for-TV movie that would have brought Uncle Martin and Tim O'Hara back together for one final adventure, but the project was tragically derailed by circumstances beyond anyone's control. The reunion movie had an intriguing premise that would have provided a logical explanation for Uncle Martin's long absence from Earth, while setting up new comedic situations for the beloved characters. According to the planned storyline, Uncle Martin had finally succeeded in returning to Mars after spending years stranded on Earth, but his experiences with human culture had made him something of an expert on Earth civilization among his fellow Martians. The script called for Martin to be put in charge of the Earth culture section of a Martian museum, a position that he found deeply unsatisfying and frustrating. The story would have shown Martin becoming increasingly annoyed as groups of young Martian visitors toured his exhibit and ridiculed an Earth space probe that was on display, treating human technological achievements with disdain and mockery. This disrespectful attitude toward Earth would have motivated Martin to take decisive action, stealing the nearest available Martian spacecraft and heading back to Earth to reconnect with his old friend Tim O'Hara. The movie would have found Tim working as a newspaper editor in the 1990s, with his son having just started working at the same paper, creating generational conflict over the types of routine assignments the younger O'Hara was being given. Both Ray Walston and Bill Bixby had enthusiastically agreed to participate in the project, and Bixby was even scheduled to direct the film in addition to reprising his role as Tim. However, the reunion movie never progressed beyond the planning stages, because Bill Bixby passed away in November 1993, making the project impossible to complete as originally conceived. Fact 13. The show's creator found the script at bottom of reject pile. The script that would eventually become My Favorite Martian had been rejected by virtually every producer in Hollywood before finally finding its way to Jack Chertok, who discovered John L. Green's pilot teleplay, buried at the very bottom of a towering stack of discarded scripts at the prestigious William Morris Talent Agency. According to a 1963 article published in the Rocky Mountain News, producer Jack Chertok was actively searching for a new television project when he visited the William Morris Agency offices to review potential scripts. The agents presented him with numerous possibilities, but Chertok found himself drawn to a particular script that had somehow ended up at the bottom of what appeared to be a rejection pile. When Chertok expressed interest in Green's My Favorite Martian concept, the agency representatives were genuinely surprised and tried to discourage him from pursuing the project. They explained that the premise for such a series had already been read and evaluated by virtually every producer who had ever seen it. And without exception, every single one had passed on the opportunity to develop it for television. The agents made it clear that Green's script about a stranded Martian living with a human reporter had been making the rounds in Hollywood for some time, consistently winding up at the bottom of script stacks after being rejected by producer after producer. The William Morris representatives seemed baffled that Chertok would want to take on a project that had been so thoroughly dismissed by the industry. However, Chertok saw something in the concept that all the other producers had missed or dismissed. When the agency men warned him about the script's history of rejections, Chertok reportedly responded with confidence, telling them, "That's why I want it." This decision to take a chance on a repeatedly rejected script ultimately led to the creation of one of the most beloved fantasy sitcoms of the 1960s, proving that sometimes the best ideas are the ones that everyone else has overlooked. Fact 14. Uncle Martin's real name was mathematical. Behind the friendly facade of Uncle Martin lay a true Martian identity that sounded more like a scientific formula than a character name from a family-friendly television comedy, revealing the show's attempts to blend genuine science fiction concepts with lighthearted suburban humor. In the second season episode titled "We Love You, Miss Pringle," viewers learned that Uncle Martin's real Martian name was Exiguous 12 and 1/2, a designation that immediately stood out as completely different from the warm, familial nickname that Tim O'Hara had given his extraterrestrial roommate. The mathematical nature of this name suggested that Martian society operated on entirely different naming conventions than human culture, possibly indicating a more scientifically oriented civilization, where individuals might be identified by numerical designations rather than traditional personal names. This unusual naming system was referenced again later in the series, when Uncle Martin's young nephew Andromeda crash-landed on Earth during the 3rd season. The mathematical naming pattern established with Uncle Martin's true identity helped reinforce the idea that Martians had developed a completely alien approach to personal identification that reflected their advanced technological society. The choice to give Uncle Martin such a clinical, equation-like name demonstrated the show's underlying commitment to maintaining some degree of scientific credibility even within its comedic framework. While My Favorite Martian was primarily designed as light entertainment for families, the writers clearly wanted to suggest that their Martian characters came from a genuinely different world with its own logical systems and cultural practices. The contrast between the warm, human nickname Uncle Martin and the cold, mathematical designation Exiguous 12 and 1/2 also highlighted one of the show's central themes about the differences between Martian logic and human emotion. Tim's instinctive decision to give his alien friend a familiar, family-oriented nickname represented the human tendency to create personal connections, while Martin's true name reflected his origins in a more systematized, scientifically oriented society. Fact 15. Ray Walston played both sides in the 1999 remake. In one of the most ironic casting decisions in Hollywood history, Ray Walston agreed to appear in Disney's 1999 film adaptation of My Favorite Martian, but instead of reprising his beloved role as Uncle Martin, he played a character who was essentially hunting down and working against the new version of his own iconic Martian character. The 1999 movie starred Christopher Lloyd as the new Uncle Martin and Jeff Daniels as Tim O'Hara, updating the original concept for a modern audience with significantly different special effects and a more elaborate storyline. By this time, both Bill Bixby and Pamela Britton had passed away, with Bixby dying in 1993 and Britton in 1974, making Walston the only surviving principal cast member from the original series who could participate in the remake. Rather than simply making a cameo appearance as the original Uncle Martin or playing a friendly supporting character, Walston took on the role of a character named Armiton, who was revealed to be another Martian who had been stranded on Earth since the time of the original television series. However, Armiton's circumstances and motivations were completely different from the lovable Uncle Martin that audiences remembered from the 1960s. In the film's storyline, Armiton had spent decades on Earth working undercover as a government investigator specializing in unidentified flying objects, essentially becoming part of the very system that would seek to capture and study visiting extraterrestrials. This meant that when Christopher Lloyd's Uncle Martin arrived on Earth, Walston's character was positioned as someone who would be involved in tracking him down rather than helping him. The casting created the surreal situation where the actor who had originally brought Uncle Martin to life was now playing a character whose job involved pursuing and potentially capturing the new version of his most famous role, turning Ray Walston into the antagonist of his own legacy character 33 years after the original series ended.